Men have no authority in marriage. So one thing I would say is with let's start with the workforce. On the workforce, you have a boss, and then you have the people under the boss. You have the managers who are managing the employees, and the employees are all play an important role, and no one's really clamoring at the boss saying, well, he gets to be the boss. But the thing is, one thing I would say is the boss suffers more risk if things go wrong with the company. So with more risk comes more authority, because in order to actually justify having the responsibilities as a boss, you have to, um, in order to justify having those type of responsibilities or that level of responsibility compared to the employees, you have to give the commensurate level of authority to that boss or to that CEO or to that chief or whatever you want to replace with that. So the men in the 1950s had much more authority than the men now, and kind of like the bosses in the current positions, let's just say at your average Target, your average Walmart, or even at the higher levels in corporate, the CEOs. Um, so a lot of times the employees uh, will complain and say that they want more power, but it doesn't make sense because their level of risk is significantly less to a certain degree. So if an employee doesn't like a job, they don't have any stake in that job. If they just up and leave, they can just go find another. They can go find another CEO. So they go to another CDO. Then what? The CEO, okay, they start working with them, but the job before that, they don't have any stake in it. They don't have to work on it or anything. They just hop from job to job to job. So one thing I would say, especially in conventional relationships, um, a lot of times the women want the men to take the lead in marriage relationships, but the man, he's taking the lead. So in the modern day, he may have the same responsibilities as the men in the 1950s, but he doesn't have the same authority. Uh, so there's no incentive for him to want to take the risk associated and to want to take the amount of responsibility and the amount of accountability associated with being in a leadership role. Uh, one thing I know, or one thing I would say is in the modern world, women say they want to be men's equals, but when you get to the nitty gritty of it, they don't want to take the same commensurate level of risk associated with wanting the same level of authority. So, for example, if someone breaks into your house, a lot of times the women that I did surveys with, they would say that they want their husbands to step in and take care of the robber or the bad man. Um, and one thing I would note is, on top of that, is the level of risk associated with that situation is much higher for the man than the woman. Um, and he's expected to take on that risk. So then this is where we get into hierarchies. So the hierarchies are depending on, in any given field or any given trade, any given area, like even in the military, depends on competence, depends on a person's ability to carry out a task that's different from another person's ability to carry out a task. So a man taking higher levels of risk and taking different or having a different role connotes a different place in the hierarchy. Now, a lot of the women, they still wanted to be the man's equal, but they wanted to expect him to risk his life for her and her children. Which it's fine that she wants him to risk his life, but if he's going to risk his life, you got to give him a justification for that. He has to have the commensurate level of authority associated with the responsibility you want to place on him, which is kind of gone in the modern world right now. The average guy has very little, if any, incentive to get legally married. Now, generally speaking, the incentive to get married is to have kids, but um, if you don't have any authority, where this becomes an issue is women are naturally hypergamous. So they naturally trade up to higher partners who are rank higher in the social hierarchy. So if a man is, if a man doesn't have a higher level of authority in a marriage, just in my opinion, she won't see him as like it kind of destroys the possibility for romantic attraction because in order for women to be generally speaking, in order for a woman to be romantically attracted to a man, she has to look up to the man. So if the man doesn't have a different position in that marriage, and even you could almost say a higher position, then his lovability, like the woman could easily fall out of love. Uh, this is just a thought to get the conversation rolling. I might do a part two in the future, but the idea from this is that men in relationships, just like in the 1950s, they're expected to be the bosses. Uh, Only thing is, the women, they can leave that company and go somewhere else, and they have no stake in staying in that company. But then the man takes on all the risk financially in divorce courts, in child custody proceedings. Maybe he loses his kid. Maybe he has to pay the divorce. Maybe he has to pay the fees for the woman's attorneys, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, that depends on the state. Um, there's not all states do that. I think in Texas it's different. Texas actually supports fathers, which is interesting. I learned that from a relative. But yeah, men have no authority in marriage.